The Forum at 8 on SAFM.
Let's first start with you, Professor Landsberg. There is a view by some that this is either politicking as in some form of power play. Certainly this has been what has been projected, at least in the media. And some have even suggested that President Jacob Zuma has pretty much shoved his emissary under the bus in favor of pleasing President Robert Mugabe. But how should we see this? Is this all part and parcel of what we call diplomacy?
Well, it's certainly politics, and it's the politicization of diplomacy. You know, what makes this so interesting is that the comment which President Mugabe latched on, as articulated by Ambassador Lindiwe Zulu, is certainly not the most critical thing she said about Zimbabwe over the course of the last 2 years. She has been very vocal. She's been the most prominent member of the facilitation team, and I want to stress on behalf of President Zuma, and the Zimbabweans have made a great deal of the fact that they did not get from SADC 3 facilitators. They got one. In fact, to quote them, I mean, it's a very telling statement. They said, we were given one facilitator with one mouth, referring to President Jacob Zuma. So two interesting questions. If this is not the most critical thing she said over the last while, why now? Why this vitriolic attack on her? And it seems to me that Zanu-PF is politicizing the diplomacy, and we'll get into the details. And they have a very, very clear objective, namely, they want those who's starting to flag some red lights over the elections of the 31st. They wish to silence them and almost regain the, one can't say moral high ground in this case, but certainly the political ground from all those who are casting doubt over the outcome of the election.
Now, let me come to you, Dr. Zinesa. There are those who say there is a history, there's a context to the approach that we're taking at South Africa. And we look at South Africa's foreign policy and how diplomacy has been used as a tool to implement that. But it all goes back to what some critics have said, that issue of quiet diplomacy. And if one looks at the tenets of quiet diplomacy, this latest move, what we're seeing now, that is keeping the negotiations pretty much behind closed doors, talking to the various stakeholders involved, keeping it out of the media, what we're seeing now seems to ring true of that.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think it is indeed important to put South Africa's facilitation of Zimbabwe's intra-political dialogue into context. Talking about quiet diplomacy, I think one thing that we should also recognize is that even though the so-called quiet diplomacy took a beating from various sectors, it is that so-called quiet diplomacy under President Thabo Mbeki that resulted in Zimbabwe's political parties agreeing to the global political agreement, which has taken Zimbabwe out of the woods. Even though Zimbabwe might not be in the best of positions, I think it is in a far better place than it was prior to President Mbeki's mediation. Moving on to the current impasse that we have, I think I will buy Professor Landsberg's point that one should look at the timing of the vitriol that we are hearing from President Robert Mugabe and other Zanu-PF officials. They should be taken in the context of a run-up to the election and the need to also address Zanu-PF's constituency, because there are certain Zanu-PF hardliners who feel that President Mugabe and Zanu-PF might have bended backwards too much to SADC facilitation. But I think there are three quick points that I'd like to mention at this particular point. That other quarters viewed the recent presidential statement from Mark Maharaj as the point of South Africa possibly bulking into President Robert Mugabe's pressure. then there is a viewpoint that this is meant to diffuse tensions. There is unnecessary diversion from the key issue, which is Zimbabwe's forthcoming elections. So rather than talking about individuals, there is need to focus on ensuring that Zimbabwe, even though it might not be as ready as the regional body would have wanted for it to conduct a credible election, there is attention towards that. Then the third quick point is probably the lack of a clear communication strategy from the facilitators' behest. In this particular case, President Jacob Zuma. Even though some say that Zimbabwe's case is intricate and complex and should not be a megaphone diplomacy case, but I think there should have been regular updates from the so-called one facilitator with one mouth on what is happening in Zimbabwe.
So, David Munyai, let's look at the timing and also what the function of diplomacy is. It is, as has been raised by Professor Landsberg and Dr. Zinesa, at a very important and sensitive time, but one can't look at South Africa's diplomatic stance outside of the goals and tradition of South Africa's foreign policy. So, the question here is, what does South Africa want out of this? What can it give? And what is expected of it as facilitator by Zimbabwe? So whether you call it handshake diplomacy, whether you call it quiet diplomacy, there must be very clear goals that are aligned to South Africa's ultimate goal in terms of foreign policy, which reflects national ambitions.
Indeed. I think the main goal of South Africa has always been to better the lives of its people and the continent. So it is within that context that South Africa is always playing a role of advancing SADC as well as the AU. And in this instance, we also have to be clear that while South Africa has a direct line with Harare, in this instance, it is playing a facilitating role on behalf of SADC. I think that point is very critical, that it cannot speak on its own without consulting fellow SADC members. So it's become a very dicey situation. And in an unusual stance by President Zuma to distance himself from the views of his own advisor, I mean, it's very unusual. But if you understand within diplomacy, at times it is necessary in a way to refocus the attention of the world on the real issues of elections. And given the kind of the complex nature of these elections, in terms of harmonization of local as well parliamentary and presidential, I don't think Zimbabwe is ready at the moment, and therefore it will need more help, as well as keeping all forces in Zimbabwe the attention of a free and fair elections. I think that's what President Zuma is trying to do, at the same time without really dissing his own advisor. I think Ambassador Lindiwe Zulu is well experienced and well-known a diplomat.
So, Professor Landsberg, what does it mean for South Africa going forward? President Zuma himself, earlier on, following the Central African Republic saga, said our diplomacy cannot afford to neglect public opinion.
I'm actually glad you asked the question, because I was going to respond in particular to what David is saying. And I think what makes your topic this morning so fascinating, Tsepiso, is that we're not talking about the goals that South Africa seek to achieve. In this case, they clearly want a free and fair outcome, and they would like Zimbabwe to get over this impasse that has been bedeviling them since 1998, if not earlier. I think we're talking here about South Africa's political style. And without reminding South Africa about some faux pas, some blunders that it has committed in recent years. For example, we vote in favor of a particular resolution vis-a-vis Libya, and just to distance ourselves from it. What is interesting here, and the analogy that you use, and I see the media is also using it, this notion that Lindiwe Zulu, a very seasoned ambassador, was almost thrown under the bus and being allowed to be rolled over by a bus. It speaks to our style. So, why is it that she's been allowed, not by SADC, certainly not by Zimbabwe, but by her own government and certainly by the head of state, to speak for 2 years and to be so open and transparent on the Zimbabwe issue without something being said, at least not publicly. Why does Mac Maharaj come out now as presidential spokesperson saying he himself has failed in his duty to allow Lindiwe Zulu to say that? And again, I'm saying to you, Zimbabwe has latched onto something that is not the most critical and offending coming from Lindiwe Zulu. So why now? And finally, on this point, what could they have done differently? I think instead of going to the extent of not only forcing Lindiwe Zulu as ambassador to withdraw her statement, but by them even apologizing publicly for the statements which she has made, which is not different from what she has said all along. She's basically said that the problems with the special votes last week may have a bearing on the outcome of the election on the 31st. I mean, that's really what Lindiwe Zulu said. What they could have done is to privately communicate to the Zimbabweans saying, okay, we will talk to Lindiwe Zulu, and then get the president, who, according to President Mugabe, is quote-unquote the one facilitator with one mouth, and to get him not just to speak, but to reiterate the positions that Lindiwe Zulu have been making, because I think she did not violate any government policy. She has articulated what seems to be official stated South African policy, which now begs the question, have we withdrawn, have we retracted, have we retreated, have we now caved in to Robert Mugabe and played into his hands? And I'm afraid it seems like that, at least for now. Okay. So another set of damage control will have to be done.
The Forum at 8 on SAFM.